Hello, thank you for joining me, TimJamz, in this chat. Today we're looking at Creation Week, and the question is, do plants die in the beginning? The so the the question stems from Romans 5:12. We've got it here on the screen in front of us. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. Now, I'm approaching this from the perspective of a literal 6-day creation week. That's the name of the book that I'm working on. And the rebuttal counter argument by theistic evolutionists, those who say they believe in the Bible with one hand, and on the other hand, they believe in millions and billions of years of evolution, is they say that Romans 5:12 is only referring to death coming upon men, not anything else in creation, not the animal kingdom, not the plant kingdom. And so they say it doesn't preclude death from plants dying, animals dying before man came on the scene. That's a great question. And the response of young earth creationists so far has been to say, well, plants don't have the breath of life and they don't have blood. And so if they did die, then it would be okay because it wouldn't be the same kind of death. And only people have souls, according to scripture. Which is, that's an interesting argument to make. I like to believe that the creation week, the picture of what happened in the beginning is like a puzzle, and God scattered the puzzle pieces throughout the whole scriptures from Genesis to Revelation. And so what I like to do is to go find and collect puzzle pieces and then try to put them together to try to fit them together to see a more fuller picture. And the more passages that speak to a specific topic with alignment and consistency, it helps, I think, give additional weight to how it should be properly interpreted and applied. So if we look at Romans 5:12, for example, the rebuttal, the counter argument by theistic evolutionists, I think is based on the last half of this verse where it says, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. Is that true? Yes. It's specifically talking about death linked to men. But the reason why is it says because all sinned. All men sinned, and therefore death came upon all men. But the earlier part of this verse is not talking about all men. It's talking about one man. And so when it's talking about the one man, it says just as sin came into the world and death through sin, through one man. It's not saying sin and death, or what I like to refer to as the law of sin and death, came upon only all men. It says it came into the world. And I believe that the proper way to interpret that part of the verse, sin and death, the law of sin and death came into the world, is it means all creation on the earth, over all the earth. And the confirmation for that, and we find another puzzle piece here in Genesis 1:26. And God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion, ... over all the earth. So everything that mankind was given dominion over, and dominion involves authority, stewardship of responsibility. Everything that mankind was given dominion over, which included over all the earth, was negatively influenced after the fall because it introduced the law of sin and death onto the scene. That doesn't necessarily mean that the plant kingdom or the animal kingdom can sin. But I believe that there was the introduction of perishability, which is the language I like to use. I like to use the language perishability. And we see another confirmation of perishability negatively influencing specifically the plant kingdom with a couple more puzzle pieces that we can examine in Genesis 1:29. This is before the fall, and God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food." The key part of this verse is that it's on the face of all the earth. Now let's compare that with Genesis chapter 3 after the fall. And there's a lot of moving parts going on, but God basically showed up and he's applying mercy and justice on the scene. And he gives man a mandate, and he says in verse 17, "Cursed is the ground because of you." And then in verse 18, he says, "And you shall eat the plants of the field." And the key part of this is of the field. So before the fall, we have all of the plants and all the trees on the face of all the earth. And after the fall, it's limited to eating the plants of the field. "By the sweat of your face, you shall eat bread," verse 19. So, in other words, agricultural activities had to be implemented. Why? I believe it's because this is inferring there was a change in the plant kingdom. Verse 18, "Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you." Talking about the ground. Before the fall, the ground produced all of the herbs, all of the trees without mankind working in a field. But after the fall, the conditions had changed. Why? Because mankind had dominion over all the earth, and when he fell, the one man sinned, death entered into all the world. Perishability negatively influenced the plant kingdom. The other thing that theistic evolutionists like to do is there's a number of scriptures that talk about plants dying, trees dying, grass withers and flowers fade away. And they say, look, this is all scriptural evidence that the plant kingdom involves death, or as I like to call it, perishability. I mean, even have in the Gospels, Jesus says, if a seed falls to the ground and dies, it abides alone. And he goes on to describe it further and how it can bear forth much fruit. But the point is that he's talking about a seed dying. So the question is it a legitimate interpretation to take all these scriptures? There's so many of them that we're not gonna be able to go through them all today, but is it a legitimate interpretation to take all these passages and then project them back into the conditions of the beginning? And I would like to say that's not accurate. And it's because of some of these other puzzle pieces that show there was an alignment and there was a consistency in how the conditions were before the fall. And I believe that those conditions also mirror the conditions of when the earth will be restored. Okay, so then if the conditions were different before the fall and after the fall, then does that mean there's going to be a difference in conditions in the end, in the time of the full restoration of the earth? And I believe the answer to that question is yes. And we see an alignment and a consistency in this passage of Ezekiel 47. Now, this is a prophetic passage. We always have to be disciplined in examining the context of prophecies to make sure we're getting our interpretations correctly. A lot of prophetic passages have multiple levels of interpretation. Some of those are metaphorical, some of those are foretelling. There's passages that talk about the prophecies of the life of Jesus and his first coming, and when he was crucified, and the resurrection. This passage, I believe, as we go through, there's key details that give us an understanding that this is talking about a literal place on the earth that has conditions which are mirroring what it was like in creation week. And so we'll pick up the story in Ezekiel 47, 6 through 12. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he led me back to the bank of the river. And as I went back, I saw on the bank of the river very many trees on the one side and on the other. And he said to me, this water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah and enters the sea. When the water flows into the sea, the water will become fresh. And wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live, and there will be very many fish. For this water goes there, that the waters of the sea may become fresh, so everything will live where the river goes. Fishermen will stand beside the sea, from En-gedi to En-eglaim. It will be a place for the spreading of nets. Its fish will be of very many kinds, like the fish of the great sea. But its swamps and marshes will not become fresh, for they are to be left for salt. And on the banks, on both sides of the river, there will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail, but they will bear fresh fruit every month, because the water for them flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for healing. Now, I think the key of this entire passage, well, first of all, the details that I think that confirm this is a physical place on the earth is we're given geographical locations. For example, it says from En-gedi to En-eglaim, and it's talking about fishermen spreading their nets and catching fish. Very many fish are available in this river. Now we know, in Revelation, there's a prophecy about, and it talks about the tree of life and the paradise of God, which is referring to the kingdom of heaven, the third heavens, as it's referred to by Paul the Apostle. And it says that the leaves will not wither or fade away. That's awesome. That's an awesome prophecy. But that's talking about a spiritual truth. But this passage in Ezekiel 47 is talking about how I like to understand it and interpret it properly is a physical place on the earth. So if that's possible, if there can be a place, a river from En-gedi to En-eglaim, it says the water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah and enters the sea. Then these trees are actual fruit-bearing trees on the earth. They're not just in heaven, even though the one that's in heaven is awesome. But these are trees, and it says their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail. So when we look at the physical creation today, is there scientific evidence of unwithering leaves on fruit trees that have non-failing fruit? Because that's what Scripture gives us a puzzle piece that says those are the conditions we can expect in the full restoration of the earth. And if we can expect that to be restored, then that aligns with the conditions as we just examined, as it was before the fall. When God had given man food provision, he said, all the earth will produce herbs and trees, and Adam didn't have to work in the field in order to enjoy those blessings. So the answer to the question, do plants die in the beginning, I believe is no. There is no perishability. The law of sin and death had not yet entered into the world. As it says in Romans 5:12, it came in through one man. And that should give us hope. It gives us an understanding of where we came from and an expectation of where we're going. And so with that, we'll catch you later.